Good afternoon and welcome to the Tribal Brownfields Grant Overview for EPA Region 5. I'm Roxanne Anderson, the KSU Technical Assistance to Brownfields Regional Director for US EPA Region 5. I'm joined today by our friends at the US EPA, Jacqueline Carreno and Tori Ippolito, as well as Jason White, the Environmental Programs Director for Cherokee Nation. We also have the pleasure of hearing from Oral Salters, Co-Director for Tribal Tab, and Beth Grigsby from Region 5 Tab. We're thrilled to have you all join us, and we've got an exciting afternoon lined up. Next. Hey, Dana, do you know if if we can go to the next slide, or is there an issue?
I don't know if it's on my end that it's breaking out or not. Which slide do you need me to be on?
The technical slide?
So I'm on technical notes or the Zoom basics?
Technical notes. Sorry,
So
it
I'm
wasn't.
on technical notes.
Okay, I didn't see it, sorry.
No worries.
I do have a few quick technical points to go over before we get started. If you do have technical difficulties, which we might be having with your connection, please call 785-200-7005 or email sr@ksu.edu, and someone should be able to assist you. We are recording this workshop today, and the recording along with the presentation slides will be available on the KSU Tab website where you registered for this event within the next few days. That link will be shared again in the chat box. Next. A few quick reminders to ensure a pleasant experience for everyone. All participants are automatically muted and their videos are turned off. We would like for this session to be as interactive as possible, so we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the event today, and you can do so by using the chat feature located in the Zoom toolbar. To make sure we're able to verify your attendance, you can change your participant name to match the name you used for registration. You can do this by clicking on the participants icon on the Zoom toolbar as well. When the list of participants come up, you locate yourself, click on the More button, and select Rename, and a new box will appear asking you to enter a new screen name. Also, just for fun, we'd like you to introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name and your organization, and another little tidbit about yourself if you'd like to share. Next. And with that, I will pass it off to Jacqueline.
Thank you, Roxanne. My name is Jackie Correño. I am the Brownfield Tribal Coordinator here in Region 5, and we will go over the purpose and agenda. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, as I mentioned, we will go over the purpose of this webinar. We'll go have a grant walkthrough of what to do and what to avoid when preparing a grant application, a Q&A session with Cherokee Nation, as well as learning about their program. We will also learn about Tribal Tab program, and at the end, questions and evaluations. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today's webinar is to kind of assist with any helpful tips in preparing a grant. So the first webinar was more of a grant overview on the different brownfields grants that we offer here in Region 5, as well as other nations, provide information on what to avoid when preparing a grant. We'll hear from Cherokee Nation about their environmental program and how they are utilizing the competitive grant funding, and we will provide information on the Tribal Tab program as well. Next slide, please. And with that, I will pass it on to Tori Ippolito, who's going to go over the EPA application tips and tricks. And she's also a Brownfields project manager here in Region 5.
Thanks for that intro, Jackie.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tori Ippolito. Like Jackie said, I'm a Brownfields project manager. And as you may know, in addition to managing Brownfields projects, as part of our job, we are also reviewing your applications. So I've reviewed a lot of applications and I've done a lot of debriefs as well. And I really appreciated Jen from Bay Mills plug in the last webinar to take advantage of debriefs if you are unsuccessful, because having an EPA project manager sit down with you and walk through your application and talk through where you could have scored better is just really invaluable. And we especially want to see our tribes do well. So please take advantage of debriefs. They're such a great resource. That being said, today I'm going to highlight a few things that I find myself repeating in debriefs that are sort of common pitfalls that I see in applications before I hand it off to KSU to get into the nitty-gritty. So next slide, please. So I'd like to start by going over the general EPA evaluation process, because I know it can kind of feel like, your application goes into this black box and comes out with a yes or no on it. But to just demystify it a little bit, it does go through a lengthy review that I've broken down here into 3 main stages. The first one is the threshold review, which is just a pass-fail. There's no points allocated in this section. It's just to make sure that the applicant is eligible, to make sure that the site is eligible if it's a cleanup, etc. And I think KSU will talk about that in a little more detail later. The second thing that we look at is the programmatic section. And this is scored based on your organizational ability to manage the grant, based on your past performance managing federal funding or other funding. And I know most of you here probably have 128A funds, so highlighting how you've been able to manage those projects successfully, how you've met our reporting requirements in a timely manner, and things like that is what we're looking for in that programmatic section. And then the last section is the most in-depth review, is going to be of your narrative. So here we have multiple readers go through your application and score it. On the left side of the slide, I have a screenshot of last year's request for funding announcement for assessments specifically. And this is towards the bottom of the RFA, which I know is a long, tough read, but I like to point it out because this section lists each criteria and the points that are allocated to each one. And this section is really similar to what EPA and reviewers are looking at when we're doing our scoring. So we're going through your narrative with a fine-tooth comb, and we're giving every one of these criteria a score out of X number of points. I also like to say here, don't write like you're writing to your project officer or somebody who knows your community. You want to be really answering all of the criteria fully and in detail, as if the reader has no idea what challenges you're facing as a community and as a tribe. And to wrap up the scoring process, your ranking score of this narrative will get added to your programmatic score, so long as you've passed threshold, and that will be your total score, and the highest of those total scores is what ends up getting funded. So next slide, please. So moving on to some common mistakes that I see in applications. The excerpts on this slide are taken from last year's RFA and that criteria section that I showed on the previous slide. And there's multiple points within the application where it will ask you to describe some phenomenon of your community, like brownfield challenges, the health of sensitive populations, and then also ask that you connect how the grant will help with what you just described. And they'll usually use this language, the extent to which this grant. And a common mistake that I see here is applicants not connecting back to this and not answering directly how the grant may help. So I know it might seem kind of implicit that your brownfields challenges will be helped when you assess sites with your brownfields assessment grant, but you do have to spell it out every time. Next slide, please. And another easy way to lose points is in these sections here that end with "then the response may only earn." It's kind of similar to what I said before. If you're not directly and fully answering the criteria with something to the effect of, this grant will meet the needs of the community because we're unable to draw on other sources of funding, specifically because we have a small population or a low income, then you're sort of automatically losing those 3 points when the section says, may only earn up to 2 if they don't address it, which is a lot of points when our competition is so competitive. Also, both criteria here come from our community needs section, which is really heavy on the request for data on your community. So it's good to try to be as granular as possible and as reasonable for you. I think tables comparing your information to a larger county, state, or national averages can be really good to demonstrate need. And then calling back to Jen from Bay Mill's previous presentation, again, where she discussed the difficulty of getting data, I think including an explanation of why accurate data representing your community isn't available, if it's not, would be really beneficial here too. Next slide. The last overarching theme that I find myself talking about in debriefs a lot is not sufficiently breaking down costs. And I see this very often for travel specifically, but for all costs, make sure that you're providing a detailed breakdown so that the reviewer is able to essentially replicate the math and really understand how you arrived at the total cost for each category. So I just have an example do and don't for travel here to help explain that. And with that, I will hand it back to KSU.
Hi there, I'm Beth Grigsby. I'm an assistant regional director for KSU TAB. I'll probably be going pretty quickly over these slides. I have a lot, but I purposely put a lot of detail so that when you go back, you might have some things to reference. Next slide, please. And it's time to look, this is the time. Take a look at last year's grant guidelines. Guidelines do change slightly every year, at least lately, that's the way it's been. So it's a good time to take a look at what you're getting in for here. What are you jumping into? So look at last year's grant guidelines, look at the facts. Also, you can take advantage of looking at grant applications, all the grant applications, successful and unsuccessful, that EPA has posted through August 31st. And don't forget Tab Easy. I wish we could do a presentation on it today, but we don't have time. But it walks you through each grant application, and it's your one-stop shop for EPA Brownfields assessment, RLFs, and cleanup application guidance. Next slide, please. And so don't forget grants.gov. Hopefully you are familiar with that. Grants.gov has some great information, and certainly rely on theirs. And also EPA has tips for brownfield applicants that you should take a look at. And hopefully we'll have those posted under resources. Next slide, please. And before the pen hits paper, start with a great project rather than a great grant. I'm going to go ahead and turn to Tori on this. She had some comments before I go through the slide. Tori, what did you have to offer?
Hi, Beth, thanks. I just wanted to comment on that first bullet point regarding eligibility and let everyone know that when the RFA comes out at the bottom, there will be a regional competition contact. I think it's usually in section 7, who you can, contact if you have questions about eligibility. Thanks.
Oh, sure. And when do you expect the guidelines to come out?
I believe early September is the goal.
Okay, so that's something to think about. So once the guidelines are out, you can contact KSU TAB for grant strategy, identification of target areas, going about community notification, trying to figure out data sources. We can certainly help you. You'll have contact information at the end. Also check out ksutab.org for online tools, particularly the Tab Easy. Next slide, please. So this is what the application is composed of. There are federal application materials that are required by grants.gov. There is a narrative information sheet with an attached letter from the Tribal Environmental Authority or State Environmental Authority. Then there's the narrative with the ranking criteria. That's what we're going to talk about today. And then there's that pass-fail threshold criteria responses. That's another part of the application. Next slide, please. And today we're going to talk about project area description, the community need, task descriptions, programmatic capability. These are components of every grant to some degree. Every grant has different ranking criteria and different criteria to respond to, but they all have the 4 components. Each criterion is made up of sub-criteria. Answer everything. If something doesn't apply, you better figure out why it doesn't apply. Come talk to EPA or talk to KSU TAB. Next slide, please. And here's project area description and plans for revitalization. Next slide. Now, here's a few fun facts that I threw at everyone for community-wide assessments. Ownership of the property isn't necessary. However, site access is. And you have one or more target sites for a community-wide assessment, as opposed to community-wide assessment for states and tribes, which is a great opportunity for tribes, since there's limited eligibility for those that can apply for this type of grant. Again, ownership of property isn't necessary. At least 3 target areas with at least 1 priority site in each target area is required, with a total of 5 priority sites. With the assessment coalition, a lead must be a state, county, tribe, regional council, or general purpose of local government. There's an MOA required. Coalition members, you have a lead, but then you can have a minimum of 2, but not more than 4 non-lead. One of the non-lead members needs to really lack the capacity to manage a grant or have that type of experience. With cleanup, the big piece here is you've got to own the site upon submittal of the grant. Phase 2 is required a draft analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives. That's what the ABCA is required. It's a draft. There's critical information in terms of when public notification has to go out and has to be done and how do you go about it. And then you need a state or tribal environmental authority letter. If you have any questions about eligibility of your site to undergo cleanup, please reach out to Region 5 now for guidance. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is, I wanted to start with project area, and actually this section, the very first section, sets the stage for the rest of the grant. It's really important. That's why I concentrate on it in terms of this is how you set it up and give that reviewer a good understanding of what's going on in your area. So you start with a geographic boundary, and this is very simplistic what I've done here. The big white square is the geographic boundary for this particular city. So you talk about the challenges and impacts within that area. Got to remember, how will the grant address these challenges and impacts? And then you drill down to a target area. I've got it here in a red circle, just for fun. And so this is where you plan to focus on most of your grant activities, if not all. It can be a neighborhood, it can be a district, a corridor, a census tract. You just define it. Each of the grants discussed today can have more than one targeted area. So then within that red circle, and you see the yellow arrow pointing to this blue building, that's a priority site in this particular grant. So you go from geographic area to targeted area, then to a priority site. And Tori, I think you had some comments on this.
Hi, Beth. I think you did a great job addressing it. I was just going to highlight that bullet point that you have in blue to remember to tie back those challenges to how the grant will address it. Thanks.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Here is a lot of words on describing your target area. Take a look at this. This is important. You do need to clearly define the target area, where it is. You should quantify all the possible brownfields in this description. Include your vacant lots, blighted or aging buildings, go on and on here. I'm not going to read it all to you, but look at where they're at. What's the condition of the neighboring properties, the high crime, the unsafe properties, or your environmentally sensitive areas, such as waterways, wetlands. Describe the locations. Where are they? Next to a school? Okay, next to a park. These are important pieces to put into the description. Check out these EJ indexes and the other with the CGES tools. This again is something I can't go into, but I've got the links here in the next slides. And are the brownfield challenges that you see within the geographic area even magnified more in the target area? Next slide, please. And quantitative data is only as good as a qualitative description of what it means. And that's important. And if you notice in the yellow highlight in the first paragraph, at least they're referencing where they're getting their information. They use the climate and economic justice screening tool. And that's great, but they don't really quantify. We're in the second paragraph here. They really get into more of, this is kind of painting the picture and comparing the data. So do a compare and contrast. If you know that you have a certain percent unemployment in your target area, well, is that the case throughout, let's say, the county or throughout the state? Those are things to compare and contrast. Next slide, please. And this is the EJ screen data sets. I've got the link here for you to take a look at. We could spend a whole webinar just talking about EJ Index and CGES, but I can't. But let us know if you'd like more information. Next slide, please. And this just actually outlines the key features. Next slide, please. And then there's the climate and economic justice screening tool, very important, helps identify disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, overburdened by pollution. And there's the link for that. Many times when you're very, very rural, these may not be representative. That's when you need to pull in your own data, the tribal data, however that you can do that. I know that Jason had some thoughts on how he went about it. He'll be talking later. Next slide, please. Description of priority sites. Lots more detail. Why is the site a priority for assessment and reuse? That's very important. What about potential contaminant impacts? Oh, well, we have this benzene plume, and that's all they say. No, the benzene plume is headed towards residential properties with basements and could cause vapor intrusion. That's a better answer. Next slide, please. Example of priority site here. This is an example. They don't say in this example why it's important to them. Why is it why did they pick it as a priority site? But it does give the size of the property, gives you an idea of the age of the buildings. What are the environmental concerns? Why is it, why is it important? It's in a special flood hazard area near a creek. Could have hazardous material runoff, could be an environmental issue. Next slide, please. And reuse should align with the challenges presented in the target area. That is exactly what Tori was talking about. That's very important. Do reuse strategies that align with environmental justice, with climate action and community resilience. And I know the tribes are very strong in the climate action and community resilience as well as environmental justice. So you certainly have an edge there. What is your plan? So if you have a reuse strategy, how does it align with your plan? And it can be a comprehensive plan, it can be a district plan, or it could be a plan that you've named in your community. Just describe it. Talk about the community's involvement with that plan. I'm not going to keep going on about cleanup because I'm afraid I don't have much time. I'm so sorry. Next slide, please. And so what I meant by that was setting the stage in the target area description. And this is a good example, talking about the scarcity of housing, talking about how the housing isn't affordable. It's squeezing people out. They can't afford a home. That's tied then to the master plan that focused on the area and had neighborhood and design charrette ideas. And then from that, the major elements of each plan involved including single-family townhomes and two-story townhomes. Add your reuse plans or community ideas and tie it all to the revitalization of the targeted area. Next slide, please. Focus on outcomes and benefits. You've got to quantify. How would that proposed project improve local climate adaptation mitigation capacity? How will you incorporate reuse of the priority site to facilitate renewable energy from wind, solar, geothermal energy, or other energy efficient measures? Quantify. What are the benefits from that updated infrastructure? Safer with lighting, walkways, mitigation of vehicle congestion and air pollution. Try to quantify if possible. What about those sewer and stormwater upgrades that will come with new construction or new redevelopment? And also the energy costs, the benefits to sustainable reuse of buildings or structures. Next slide, please. Kristen, can you give me an idea of how much time I have? It's hard to judge where I'm at.
Yep, you have about 23 minutes left.
Oh, wow, I can slow down a little bit. Okay, strategy for leveraging resources. What's your eligibility for monetary funding from other resources? In other words, with this, EPA is looking at this project. And this is the competitive grants, but they are looking in terms of this is seed money, really, to expand and grow your Brownfields program. So what are other funding, other resources that you as your tribe can use towards this? And I've seen lots of different sources and grants like USDA or a city within a tribe. They have resources. Take a look at the grant applications and I think you'll get some ideas there. But the leverage funding should be easily identifiable, something that people know about. Even if it's a foundation, certainly name what the foundation is and what they do, what's their goal. Secured funding is reviewed more favorably, but look at things like local, state, federal, economic districts, TIP districts, if you do that, local partners. And then tab resources can be a leverage, such as visioning or market studies that we do at no cost to you. And for cleanup, resources for the site characterization. And once you do have the assessment secured, if the site requires additional characterization, how are you going to go about doing that for the cleanup? So you need to have resources for remediation, resources for stabilization of the site, as Jen mentioned last Tuesday, resources for site reuse. Do you have secured commitments to complete reuse? If you do, make sure you put this in your grant application. Next slide, please. Strategy for leveraging resources. Again, use of existing infrastructure is great. Go ahead, list that. But many times when you have a redevelopment, you're going to need other infrastructure. If that's the case, which it typically is, if that's the case, how will you get that infrastructure built or done? An example is replacement of lead pipes, updated septic or sewer systems. Do you already have a plan in place for that? What infrastructure needs or upgrades will be required to meet the project goals? How will you secure funding to get it? And with cleanup, additional infrastructure are key to the revitalization plans, provide a clear description of needs and upgrades, and extent to which the funding resources will be sought. Next slide, please. And then we get into the next section, all the sections are important, but as you go through the application, you build upon that story, and you need to continue to tie threads of that story together throughout the end. Next slide, please. So the community's need for funding. Why do you need the money? Well, a lot of it is reduced tax revenues due to the loss or vacant properties, small population or low income of the community. You mentioned that, and give us statistics and compare. An impoverished tax base. I think unemployment is an excellent factor. Are your limited resources prioritized elsewhere? In other words, are you putting a stormwater sewer or upgrading a wastewater treatment plant and you don't have extra funds for brownfield assessment? That's a great way to explain why you need the money. Next slide. Community need, threats to sensitive populations, use the EJ screen if it's applicable, and EPA strongly encourages applicants to use and include data from this EJ screen. Applicants are also encouraged to use the CGES tool to identify whether any priority sites are located within a disadvantaged census tract per Justice 40. Next slide, please. And threats to sensitive populations. Do not forget how the grant will address or facilitate the identification and reduction of threats to sensitive populations. Here's some good language just to take a look at, a general language. It's going to facilitate reduction of environmental contamination that may be associated with the target area's chronic disease rates, and help lessen its significantly high health burdens by removal of contaminants. Now, if I were reviewing that, I would say, well, how will it significantly do that? By removal of contaminants, who's impacted by that? That type of thing. Just more details. Next slide, please. Community need. Identify the sensitive populations in the target area and the health and welfare. How will the grant address those issues? Next. Use your tribal welfare and health information and compare to county, state, and U.S. values. What's the percentage of population living under the poverty level? I mean, we have to face it. When people are very poor, they can't afford good health care. Percentage of unemployment, median household incomes, these are great measures. What are the percentage of children, elderly, minorities, pregnant women in the target area? These are sensitive populations. You use tribal data for the health issues. You can also look at the county health rankings and roadmaps for every county in the United States. That might be helpful for you, at least for comparison, or if that's all you can get, use that. That might be helpful for you. Next slide, please. And then section 3, we have task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress. So section 3 is interesting in that it seems to garner the most points that you're ranked on in the narrative. So take a look and be very thorough. It's easy to lose points here, and I think that seems like the majority of a lot of applicants do lose points here. Next slide, please. So it's about the project task. What are you going to do? Here are examples: program management, community outreach, assessment, cleanup, reuse planning. Project implementation for each task. How are you going to do it? Have to explain. Anticipated project schedule. This is important. When are you going to have it done? By the second quarter of the grant term, by the end of the second year, make a stab at it. Because even if you're off, you can adjust it or talk to your project officer about that schedule, and if you do your general quarterly reports, you can talk about why you might be behind or why you might be ahead. Who's the lead for each task? And many times, I think applicants want to lean on the QEP, the qualified environmental professional, your consultant, basically, that is going to do all the work. Well, that's not necessarily true. You do a lot of that program management. You procure the contract, you do the oversight in terms of identification and inventory and prioritization. There's quite a bit to what you do, so don't underestimate the time or the value of your time for these tasks. Outputs for each task, those are, well, what are you going to do? What are the metrics? So you're going to inventory. You're going to have 4 community meetings, 20 quarterly reports. But those are how you go about the descriptions, the cost estimates, and measuring progress. Next slide, please. And here are typical eligible tasks. Procurement, of course, is one. EPA reporting, financial and records management, those types of things. The assessment can include inventory, site selection, community engagement, phase 1 and phase 2, investigations, cleanup, reuse planning, coordinated planning around targeted area sites, assessment planning. There are so many wonderful tools EPA has about eligible planning activities that you should look into on their EPA Brownfields website. Cleanup related, you will have things like cleanup and reuse planning, community engagement, cleanup oversight, site cleanup. And for all the grant types, you may use up to 10% of the total grant award for health monitoring. Please note, administrative costs may not exceed 5% of the total award amount. Next slide, please. Proposed cleanup plan. This is for cleanup grants only. So your cleanup plan has to be reasonable. And that's something, you can talk to EPA about it, and you can actually, if you'd like, call KSU tab, and we could talk about, how reasonable is this proposed cleanup plan? Include the appropriateness of the cleanup methods being considered. It might have to do with where you're doing the cleanup. Do you have to add more resources due to proximity to residential residents, that type of thing? Deficiencies that have been noticed in past grant debriefings. These have been things, the debriefing information that we've received from successful and unsuccessful grantees when they've had the debrief with EPA. They needed to include the details of the cleanup plan, not just say, okay, we're referencing the ABCA and that should call it a day. No, you have to talk about it in the narrative of your cleanup grant. So to do now, these are things you should do now. Ensure your phase 2 is complete, and complete a draft ABCA, the analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives. Obtain multiple estimates for each anticipated cost. That's important to have practical costs. Use local information when possible. Project ahead to anticipate changes in cost, because the costs that you might have had 3 or 4 years ago are different now. Everything has gone up everywhere. Laboratory in particular. Excavation is very expensive. Heavy equipment, that type of thing. You have to project ahead and find out what is the norm for these types of costs. Next slide, please. And here's an example of an assessment grant application. Now, this is something that I did resource from one of the EPA presentations last year for funding year 24, and that's what we're talking about, the guidelines and that type of thing for last year. The first thing Tori said when she looked at this was, well, wait a minute, project task, look how many there are. There's program management, community outreach, phase 1, phase 2, cleanup planning, administrative cost. Really keep those activities or those tasks to no more than 4 or 5. You can bundle the phase 1 and phase 2 together. You can even bundle inventory phase 1 and phase 2 together. You really shouldn't have that much, and it makes it too busy and harder to read. Other notes here are from the EPA, and I won't go into those now, but use the table that they provide in the grant guidelines. Don't be crazy, don't be creative. Just use the table that they have and ask questions. Find out what's permitted, what isn't. Next slide, please. So plan to measure and evaluate the environmental progress and results. How do you do that? Well, you just discuss your plan and mechanism to track, measure, and evaluate progress. So deficiencies noted in past grant debriefings have been include a completion of a cleanup plan as measured result to track. That's huge, and I think that's a great one to track. Explain the grantee will report to EPA through acres. Yes, you have to. That's a great way to track your track, measure, evaluate environmental progress. Lack of description of the outputs. Yeah, you need more information there. You need to include outcomes in addition to outputs. So right now, start identifying quantifiable outcomes you can use to show progress. Relate these back to the outcomes and benefits of reuse strategy. Obtain initial data. It seems like a lot, but if you start looking at some of the other successful grant applications, you'll see how they go about it. And I think it's, of course you don't want to copy what somebody else has done, but if they have a great idea and it's applicable, hey, make it your own and make it your tribal approach. Next slide, please. Past performance. This is when you show off your staff and your capabilities. Next slide, please. So you're near the end and don't treat it as a downhill slide to finish. And I've written a lot of grants when I was a consultant, and it was really easy to do. It's actually programmatic capability is an easy one in many ways to start right away. It's like a resume. You shine a positive light on you and the team and highlight all your credentials and relevant experience. That's great information to have. And you want EPA to know that you and your team have what it takes for your project to be a success. Next slide, please. So, are you capable of managing this grant? I think most of you do. You already work with the 128A funding. I think that you're very capable. Just discuss how your team will be structured to do this. Show the degree of expertise qualifications. You want to be set up for success. EPA wants to make sure you're set up for success. Next slide, please. New this year, you should describe your efforts to promote strong labor practices, local hiring, procurement, or link members of the community to potential employment opportunities in the brownfield assessment, cleanup, or redevelopment related to your project. And I think a lot of times you can add that to your RFQP that you'll be putting out for your contractors, consultants, to make this part of it, that they are doing that too. It's a trickle down thing. Next slide, please. Past performance. Again, the experience you have with the 128A is very important to put in for past performance. And did you actually, what were your accomplishments? Were you in compliance? If you weren't in compliance, well, why not? You might describe that as why not? Just to make sure they understand that things are different now. And here's why they're different now. Next slide, please. And you're not alone. Talk to EPA about your project and any questions until guidelines are released. Although EPA can always answer eligibility questions. Next slide. We do offer free EPA grant proposal reviews and strategy assistance. So take advantage of it. And a lot of the successful grantees have. And if you would like a review of last year's grant, in the event that you did not receive a grant, please forward it to us now. And maybe we can give you pointers and help you out. Take advantage of the second set of eyes. For funding year 25, get your proposal drafts in, typically 2 weeks before or no later than 5 days before the EPA proposal due date. And it's free. All of our services are free of charge. Next slide, please. And thank you. And now I believe we're getting ready to have Jason speak about the Cherokee Nation and how he has used 128A funding along with 104K to expand and broaden their Brownfields program. Next slide, please.
Well, OCO, I'm Jason White with Cherokee Nation. I work with our Brownfields program, and as a tribe, we wear many hats, so we kind of work multiple programs. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be able to share what our tribe has done, as well as our consortia, and how we've been able to build our Brownfields program. Best presentation was amazing, and she's right. There's a lot of leverage resources out there you can reach out to help build your grants, to help build your Brownfields programs. And so it's actually a very exciting time because there's a lot of opportunity within the Brownfields program. And I can just give you a quick update of what our tribe has done and how we built our program and how we kind of go after certain grants. Next slide, please. Okay, currently, Cherokee Nation, we have our 3 grants that are Brownfields related. Our first one, and pretty much our main one, was when we built a 128A assessment grant. So it created our Brownfields program, and we've had this program for I'd say about 20 years. And we've continued to evolve, apply for the grant, pretty regularly. And we built our Brownfields program and our staff up as well. And our second one is the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BIL Brownfields grant, which is like a supplemental grant. We don't hear a whole lot about it. It's kind of like with new funding. It's going to run out once the BIL money runs out. And this is to be able to build your Brownfields program even more and supplement it with additional activities. That's a pretty much amazing opportunity. I think there's like one more funding cycle left. And then we also have, we just recently was awarded the community-wide Brownfields grant. We're really excited to be able to work with our communities within our Cherokee Nation reservation boundaries. So it's actually one that we're able to do like hands-on outreach activities, going out to the community, looking at their needs, and to be able to build our Brownfields program so that we can assist these communities. Next slide, please. And there's a couple things that our staff does. Like we said, we built our Brownfields program, but we also do many activities that are not really funded through our Brownfields grant, but actually serve direct services to our tribe. This is for Cherokee Nation only. This is where we work with mostly our housing program and our HOSTA team, where we're looking at projects that provide types of services, whether it's building community residential areas, providing water and sanitation services, and we perform phase ones. These are really not covered under our Brownfields grant, but so that's why we have to use different funding sources for it. Some, like for example, maybe other programs outside of EPA, like our HUD funding, and we also use tribal funding, commerce, and some of our special project money, which includes like some of our BIL projects. And for example, just to give some of what our Brownfields program does for real estate, is that the tribe wants to buy property to put businesses on it or to redevelop or reuse it. We provide those services for them. Sometimes that will help because some of those will actually fit into our Brownfields program, so we can figure out which program actually will pay for that type of services. Like our commerce department, they actually use some of our work to be able to obtain funding outside of EPA. For example, like our commerce department, they're able to go after Department of Justice funding to be able to build programs like domestic violence shelters, as well as human services kind of for like the homeless shelter that the tribe is wanting to build with the city. So some of those are really neat projects that our Brownfields team gets to do. And our special projects are more like community outreach centers. With COVID hitting, I think we needed more of that, where we needed places where our tribal citizens can go and get like basic services, whether it be like food distribution or a place to gather or have meetings. So it kind of expands a little bit bigger. And for us, it's like, what can our Brownfields program do and develop into? Next slide, please. So we have a small team. We just lost a person last week. So right now we have about 3 people, and we're hoping to replace Chelsea Jones. Chelsea left us, and so we're building that. And of course, we've got like 3 different Brownfields grants, so we're going to be taking on a lot of work. And of course, we wear many hats and work on other projects. Next slide, please. So our Brownfields program primarily works with the ITEC member tribes, and that is the Intertribal Environmental Council Consortia. Cherokee Nation is the lead agency, so we're able to write the grant on behalf of the consortia. And so we do a lot of environmental type work for them. In our Brownfields program, we're able to identify with tribes which projects they'd like to see for redevelopment or reuse, and also to identify any concerns that they may have with certain property, and if it's eligible for reuse. And if it also actually works with some of their upper management too as well to help with redevelopment plans as well. Usually the tribe already knows by the time they reach us, and then we work with our EPA project officers if we can do assessments on those properties. Next slide, please. And just to dive a little bit deeper, for those tribes that are wanting to see if they want a Brownfields program, some of the things we do for tribes is we help them to be able to assess properties that potentially could be reused, redevelopment for their tribe. So we kind of look at the contamination, provide a, just a brief evaluation, site inspection with them. Usually they come with us and we provide, and we actually perform a phase 1 site assessment property. So they'll get a huge report that they can use to obtain funding as well. Some tribes have other funding opportunities outside of EPA, kind of like, I'm trying to think of the one, there was a BIA grant that a lot of tribes use, and they have to have phase 1 activities done on it. And so we actually always get approval from our EPA project officer. And it also helps the tribe, looking for funding sources. And sometimes we can actually conduct phase 2 activities depending on the results if it's contaminated for our phase 1s. And our staff will work with tribes in decision-making for cleanup. Sometimes I'm like, we may not want to use this property for certain activities. And we kind of help with some of the reuse plans. Next slide, please. So this is actually what shapes our 128 grant. And so we take a lot of this information when we're writing grants. How can we assist the tribes and how do we put that in a grant application? And some of the tribes, they, like I said, they wear many hats too, so they don't necessarily have the staff to be able to write a full-blown Brownfields grant. So sometimes they utilize our services. And this is just a showcase of what one of the tribes in Oklahoma does. And I probably should go back and say ITEC actually is Region 6 tribes. So we're actually located for tribes in Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. So we have 46 tribes, and this one is the Peoria tribe. This was a former golf course. The tribe bought it, wanted to reuse it, redevelop it. There's a lot of acreage on it, but a lot of the buildings on site were old and outdated. And so as you see here, this is what it looked like before. And next slide, please. And this is where we actually start talking about the redevelopment. The tribe wanted to create a community center as well as like a learning center for like early childhood. So they had multiple uses for it. We actually were able to do the phase ones for them. So when we're writing a grant, we actually put all this information in there. And it actually benefits some of the tribes that are using this for their redevelop initiatives. Next slide, please. And this is another one. This is actually the after. So you can see the new building, the new community center, and the new cultural and out offices on the bottom right. So they're actually still expanding on this, and we're excited to see that the property is able to be reused and continued for additional services for their tribal citizens. Next slide, please. I think they even have a firehouse too, so they're actually able to provide infrastructure services as well. And this is one for our tribe. I think I talked about it last Tuesday, where we have certain projects coming that are kind of quick and fast. And for example, this particular property was an old abandoned, kind of like an old concrete septic plant system, manufacturing facility. So on your top left, you can see that it looks really dirty just from a bird's eye view with the drone. And there was a lot of drums on site. There's about 66 drums. The building had lead-based paint, asbestos, some stained soil, lots of concrete remnants. Our tribe purchased this. We actually did this through a purchase, but we were able to use our Brownfields grant to be able to do the assessment type work. And our tribe was able to use different funding sources to clean up the site. Now, if we didn't, we would have probably went after cleanup money. Brownfields provides, we would have done that, but I think the tribe wanted to go at an expedited pace because we wanted to be able to do this pretty quickly. And so we were able to use tribal funds to kind of speed this along. Next slide, please. And this is it's actually still in the planning stages. And in the bottom right, you will see the planning, what's going to be like now. And it's going to be like a capital park for to honor our former chief, Wilma Mankiller. And it'll have a community garden, community building, and it has some traditional activities like for us to be able to play stickball, walking trails, and just to be able to honor our chief and have a place for our tribal citizens to gather while they're in Tahlequah. So we're super excited about this project. Next slide, please. And this is the one that I also talked about Tuesday. And we're really excited about this project because this is one of those tribal projects that doesn't really fit in the realm of brownfields, because sometimes brownfields, people think it's big municipal cities, big cities like Oklahoma City and Tulsa, but that's not really the case for tribes, especially for us. This particular community was dying. It was dying out. The town was slowly decreasing in population, and really didn't have a whole lot, but our tribe wanted to help them. Our tribe wanted to be able to preserve the community in general. So the tribe wanted to redevelop the site. And the town itself is about 150 people, but it actually serves within 15 miles 15,000 tribal citizens to live in there. So sometimes the numbers, and I love how Beth says sometimes we can put additional information into our grants to be able to get successful results, because a project like this wouldn't score very high with a town of 150, but it has a huge benefit as a community in whole, especially for our tribe. So we had to take a lot of the data that we had existing, especially with the EJ data. So we're super excited to see this community, which definitely really needed some revitalization in the community as well as the economy. The next slide, please. So like I mentioned, this town was kind of going down here. It was a former mining town for gypsum. But it didn't really have a whole lot. Like that building was itself was a former gymnasium, but it also served as like an emergency shelter where there was some food and clothing, but it was severely falling in. Had a lot of environmental issues associated with it. But our tribe wanted to redevelop, so they were able to use some tribal funds as well as BIL funds to be able to provide what we call Marble City Community Center. And they just opened this up in a couple weeks. And so we're super excited to see how our Brownfields program was able to be a part of that and be able to take that information and apply it in our grants. And then in the pictures, you see that right now it serves as a community center as well as like office space. I think there's a place where there's our cultural activities as well as a place for like daycare for the kids. So we're excited because a town like this didn't have anything like that. Next slide, please. And just to provide a little bit more on the grant side of things, one of the things for us is what grants, there's a lot of grants out there with Brownfields, and that's what we love about it, is we can pick and choose which one we think would serve our tribe the best. And some of them just don't apply to us, and so therefore we don't apply. So the first thing we do is like what programs out there, what funding's out there, and what is something that we can build our programs with. And for example, the Brownfields BIL program, I call it like a supplemental grant. And this is some of the things that we can do to help expand and build our existing 128A grant, to be able to do some things that we normally wouldn't be able to do within that budget constraints. So this is also another wonderful program for us, and we didn't apply for it last year, but the year before we actually had it. And we were able to do some phase 2 work that we just didn't have the money for in our regular 128A assessment grant. And we also had some training components and help us with some education outreach we were having trouble with. So this program is really good as far as being able to supplement your existing grants. Next slide, please. And what we're really excited about this grant, and so if there's any tribes that would like to learn more, and we would also like to invite other tribes to participate in this. For example, when we wrote this grant, our big thing was, what can we do to enhance our Brownfields program? And there was some things, we had some really old technology. Some of our stuff is getting old and outdated. And then we also wanted to build our capacity. So for us, it was the training component. And we put that in our grant, what do we need? And what do the other tribes in the ITEC need? So we use this to build our training component up. And so we're going to offer this to other tribes. If there's another tribe would like to learn more about phase 1s, and it's going to be taught with the new standards, ESA, ASTM standards for tribes. And we're also going to have asbestos inspector credential training and our lead-based paint and risk assessment training that tribes can use. And this is to help other tribes be able to do this within their reservations or programs. So we wanted to build also an opportunity for tribes to have a Brownfields networking workshop. We'll probably be reaching out to KSU TAF and other tribes to see how to best go forward with this and allow tribes an opportunity to talk about grants, what grant funding's out there, some of what works, what doesn't, some things to do, what to avoid. I really enjoyed best things. I think that is key to getting some of those grants. And I think that we need to have more more opportunities for tribes, especially when it comes to the grant writing, because some of them are very competitive. And we also wanted to enhance our program. For example, we wanted to build a Brownfield story map for the ITIC tribes. We haven't done that in our regular 128A grant. So we're using this to supplement that. And we also want to develop a phase 1 questionnaire. For example, one of the biggest questions we get is, I have a site, but I don't know where to shop. I don't know where to take it. do I do it under the NEPA review, which we can't do in our existing phase 1 program? And sometimes that's like putting property into trust. But we can help with other phase 1 activities to help tribes seek funding and redevelop initiatives and working with some of their communities. So with this one, we want to develop a questionnaire, and we're going to update some of our technology. For example, update our XRF machine. Our XRF machine is about 18 years old, so we're existing with some old property. And we want to have smartboard for trainings, and we want to buy an infrared thermographic camera. One of the biggest requests we get is a lot of tribes have abandoned USTs on their property, and this piece of equipment would actually be able to help us determine if the contents are full. And next slide, please. And our next grant, and this is one that, there's a grant funding opportunity for this, and we almost didn't apply for this because we were kind of very nervous about it, but excited. And we had a lot of communities that I think could benefit from our services. And so we wanted to do something special. And so we were able to apply for community-wide assessment grant. It doesn't start to October. It's very competitive out there, competing with both states and tribes, and some nonprofits too. So we're kind of really excited about it. We're going to kick it off. We're actually going to work with communities within Cherokee Nation. And so when we wrote this grant, I think we utilized every resource we had available. We utilized KSU tab. We reached out to our EPA project officers. We had a lot of questions on it, and they were very helpful in answering that. We also reached out to our state counterparts that had successful grants, and we kind of got like some tips on what worked, what didn't, what to do, and what the grant actually requires. And this one, we actually did a lot of in-depth, what do we need to secure this? So we had to really change the way we wrote grants. And we were very pleased and excited to be able to be awarded this. And we're only, I think, 2 tribes, I think, out of the 25 that applicants that was out there. I mean, they're awarded. Next slide, please. So with this grant, we're going to be providing phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments, working with communities. And we're going to work with the communities so that they identify sites that would serve everybody in the whole. So it kind of expands just beyond the tribal stuff. It also expands to everybody living within that community, and to be able to look at some of their needs, whether it's homelessness or food insecurity. I think one city, they want to build something for farmers, local farmers, to be able to sell their produce. And some of them have some really neat projects. Like there's one that has a cleanup where they've got a really kind of yucky site that's kind of contaminated. So we're going to look more into say maybe this might be a cleanup grant. So I think this could open up other opportunities to look at other brownfields type funding, and to be able to work with the communities and see how Cherokee Nation can serve them. So this actually grant is within our Cherokee Nation reservation. These are the 5 communities we picked in Bartlesville, Marble City, which was that community I talked about that was very small. It was Skychick, Stillwell, and Tahlequah. And we scattered them throughout the reservation, so they're different geographic boundaries. And that way we have a different area for each side. And for example, the Marble City, this could be huge because we can look and see the community's needs, whether it be like, for example, infrastructure. So we're kind of hoping to partner with other Cherokee Nation agencies, kind of like our roads department, our water and sanitation, our housing, if they want to build houses there. And so we're really hoping to have those dialogues with them. But writing this grant, we used every trick in the book to be able to secure. So our big focus is being able to apply for it within the requirements of the grant. And the community-wide, it was very interesting. It's not one we not normally have done. And if anybody needs additional information, I'll be glad to share what we did. We had some great people that helped us. So if we can answer any questions. Next slide, please. And there's some additional grant funding opportunities that Cherokee Nation really doesn't have, but I do want to let everyone know that there's other grants out there. Cherokee Nation did have a job cleanup, a Brownfields cleanup grant before I kind of started working with Brownfields, probably like in the early 2000s. And we actually used a cleanup grant on a site to preserve one of our historic buildings. It was not necessarily to create a bunch of jobs, but it was also to reutilize a property that had been transferred out and been sold out, and the tribe got it back. And they wanted to preserve it and turn it into a museum. So we're really proud of that site because it preserves the cultural history as well. And the museum creates jobs and it creates some revenue, and that's a very rural community. So we do have one experience with that, but I know listening to Jen's presentation last week made me want to maybe go after some more cleanup grants. And there's some tribes that have that. We don't really have a whole lot of experience with it. And there's a couple of other funding opportunities under Brownfields if people are interested in, like the job training grants. We've never applied for it, but our tribe is very interested. And I was told we have another department that actually provides what they call career services. Very interested. So Cherokee Nation may be applying for this in the future. And we hope to be able to add that into our what we call our career training center, and to be able to apply those jobs and that kind of deal with environmental cleanups and be able to create a resource for that. So stay tuned on that one. We haven't heard much, but I think they're very interested in it. Now, the revolving loan grant, Cherokee Nation, we've never done this grant. I've heard about it. I don't know of a lot of tribes doing it, but the reason I wanted to mention it is because for us, with this community-wide, we may be looking into this because we maybe start working more with the communities and maybe they might need that. So we're going to be following this one as well and looking at what's required of the grant and help get the information to apply for that. I know our Commerce Department has agreed to help us if we were to go after something like that. So this one might be an opportunity for our tribe. And I just wanted to kind of end it with the future grants. There's also, I think, one more year of BIL grants available. It's a short-term grant funding cycle. I think it's amazing. A lot of tribes that have applied for it. So if you're interested in that, definitely reach out and find more information about that one. Next slide, please. And this is if you have any questions or would like more information, you can reach out to Sheila, myself, or Karen. We'll be glad to answer any questions you guys have. Of course, here's our scan code, and you can also find us on the website, and we'll be glad to be able to share. We've been actually, I think that's what helped us with some of our successful grants is some of the people that have helped and mentored us. And we've had a couple tribes in your region that have been very beneficial in helping us getting some of these. They've shared the wealth. If there's anything we can ever pay back and be able to talk more about grants and share tips and what worked for us, we'll be glad to do that. And we'll be able to share information as well. So please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I think this is my last slide. And so I'll probably kick it off to Oral, and I think Oral's going to talk about his program. And
absolutely. Thank you so much, Jason. That was fantastic. I think really building on the conversation from last week, you really added a lot of context and the overview. I think that really will serve as an inspiration. And in fact, I was wondering, since we had a couple of minutes, if I could ask you a couple of questions, Jason, just to follow up.
Sure.
One thing that was really interesting was how you mentioned, you work with other departments, housing, commerce, real estate. How do you go about those coordinations and those collaborations, sometimes within that Brownfield sphere and sometimes beyond that? And just was wondering how that, the mechanics of that work.
Sure. I think for us, we had to when we were applying for a grant, we were like, who can help us and which departments can we help serve? And we were able to build that partnership. And you're right, I think that was a big thing for us because some activities we just can't do. So we may have to rely on other programs to provide information, especially when applying for a grant or operating a grant, what can they help us with? And some of them are like the infrastructure information, like the water, roads, and sanitation. And we can also reach out to some internal data that the tribe has. which also can include like census data, because we have our own membership data. So we got, like, for example, we break down to the communities, we can get that. That's a little bit more for us, more accurate than the census data, because not all tribal citizens feel comfortable check marking that they're tribal. And so that way, we can reach out to what resources we have within the tribe. But we also kind of reach out to those departments to see what they need. For example, the commerce, I think that's a new one for us. And I think it's turning out to be a really good partnership, because they'll be like, I'm really interested in building these type of services in these communities. Which one will be better? And can you help us? And so we're able to do projects for them, and they take the information and apply that in their grants, which is really neat. So we've actually seen a few projects that the tribes invested in. We're excited. I think like right now we're getting ready to work with the homeless shelter. We're going to build one within our city. And so we're excited to be able to partner with commerce as well. So we did the groundwork, the phase one activities for them, and they're able to use that to secure funding.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, so many good things happening. I was also going to ask you, thinking about all the good work that you've done internally, but then also externally as part of iTech and that consortia. You'd mentioned the other, I think it's like 46 tribal nations that you work very closely with, and I was just curious, how are you able to, kind of manage that network and coordinate with those partners and help meet those needs? Given just the breadth of that, that sense of collaboration.
Sure. Like I mentioned, there's 46, so sometimes have the state boundaries as well. A lot of it is the tribes reaching out to us. For example, they'll be like, I've got these properties in my communities. We really don't know what to do with them. We want to, and some of them they kind of want to buy too, because they want to put new businesses on it or build new structures on it. So a lot of times they'll reach out to us and be like, can you help provide this service? And it saves them a lot of money, because we're able to do it for them. So it doesn't cost any money for them to have to get a contractor. And they can actually learn side by side with us. Usually when we do inspections, they go with us, go in the buildings. Now, if it gets to like where there might be like a little bit of what they call hazmat stuff, we usually do that ourselves. But most of the time, these people are already familiar with their communities and with their community needs and the properties that are available. So a lot of it is based on request. It's usually first come, first serve. So sometimes our funding gets a little tight towards the end of the fiscal year, but we've got some really neat projects that the tribes have that for brownfields that I think we have a couple on our website that have kind of highlighted. We've done some presentations. I think like the Peoria tribe I mentioned, we're excited to be able to be a part of that and to be able to help them with assessment.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. Yeah, one final thing I was going to ask you about, and that relates to the community-wide that you all were successful with, given the kind of emerging relationships, with the cities and those communities, which is fantastic. And I think that's really a powerful model, I think nationwide, thinking about that effort and what you're able to do. And I was wondering, given some of those histories and some of those relationships, so much of it is relationship building, what were your kind of points of entry for being able to work with them and open those discussions and, kind of figuring out where you wanted to focus?
Oh yeah, working with some of the cities, they're already working with our tribe. For example, they're within the reservation. So a lot of times they're already working with other Cherokee Nation agencies, like some of our service ones. For example, some will reach out to us and say, can you do this for us? Can you provide this for us? And sometimes we can. Now, sometimes if we can't, we can also serve as like the liaison between our state and federal agencies. For example, we may be able to connect them with our state programs if we're not able to help them. And we have a great relationship with our Brownfields program with the state of Oklahoma, ODNQ. We've had them be involved in some like tank pools, some where we actually didn't have the funding, and that they actually have funding for it. So we actually create that. As well as our OCC program, Oklahoma Conservation Commission. They've got a Brownfields program. So sometimes like reaching out, like things that we normally can't do, like asbestos removal, the state may be able to do it. So sometimes it's actually finding that right collaboration between our city partners as well as our federal and state partners. And if we get any weird ones, which we get all the time, is we always ask EPA, can we do this? Is this allowable? You know, just to make sure we're going in the right direction. Sometimes they've got some really good wealth of knowledge with the expertise they have, and they give us some good guiding direction of where we should go. Now, we leave up most of our with the community work. They reach out to us. It's going to be really neat because I think we can be able to establish that dialogue. And I think, for example, some cities may reach out and say, we've got a housing need. Is that something the tribe can do? Can we bring in our housing people to build community housing in their communities? So I'm hoping this can actually expand on that a little bit more. And just talking with them, they're very open to that. So I'm thinking once we have our community meetings, we'll have our our community partners as well as our tribal partners there, and they can have those discussions. So we're excited.
Very good. Thanks again, Jason. It was fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Jason. I had a quick question as well. I don't know if there's some time oral for me to ask.
Absolutely, Jacqueline, go for it.
Okay. I'll turn my camera back on as well. I was just wondering, with all the work that you are all doing with assessments and cleanup, kind of what is the approach for redevelopment? Because I feel like that's kind of one of the main things is finding funding for the redevelopment. Because I know Brownfields, we can only support assessment and cleanup and redevelopment plans, but not the actual construction of the building. So I was kind of curious to know what the approach is that you guys take on.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, actually. A lot of the stuff that we can get internally from our tribe, they approach us. They'll be like, we've got this site in this community. We want to, for example, preserve the cultural history of it. So they want to buy historic properties that may have environmental concerns, whether it be like lead-based paint or asbestos, but they really want to get the property back. So a lot of the times the tribe's already buying certain types of property with the intentions of preserving it or reusing it. And that's why I love telling our story, because sometimes, we don't create 500 jobs, you would find in downtown Oklahoma City, but we're able to preserve something for that community. And it might create 5 jobs. Creating 5 jobs is amazing for us. But I think for us, it's even more amazing when we can serve our tribe and be able to help them come up with some of these reuse alternatives. So when they approach us, and sometimes you'll hear some after the fact, like that property that I talked about that had a former manufacturing septic system plant, concrete plant. The tribe wants to turn that into a park. And, it's such an eyesore, had a lot of environmental issues on it. So the tribe had ideas that they want to do with it. So we're excited to see our tribe wanting to reuse and revitalize certain communities. Especially communities that don't normally get a lot of attention. So sometimes there's funding out there. Sometimes the communities will approach the tribe and be like, would you be willing to build a homeless shelter here? What can we do? And they may have a piece of property that, is just sitting there not utilized. And they'll be like, would this be a great place for a homeless shelter? And I think that's kind of how we ended up doing that one. They had a partnership between the city and the tribe, and they wanted to use this property to build something like that. So for us to have we call them thumbprints. Nobody ever hears about us, but we have our thumbprints back on there. So we were like, oh, we were a part of that. We were able to do assessment. So that's why I'm a big, big fan of what Brownfields has to offer. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of what we do without the Brownfields program. So we're big, big advocates for it. And I encourage all tribes to apply for it if it fits their program needs. I know some of the funding out there doesn't really fit, like the revolving loan. I think that's one that's kind of a specialized one. I don't think a lot of tribes apply for it, but it's a great program if you can utilize it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that insight.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Jason. And thanks, Jacqueline, for the question. Yeah, I guess now we'll take a few minutes and talk a little bit about the Tribal Tab program, the reintroduction of what we're doing with that. It's an exciting time, lots going on, and we're building the infrastructure for what's next for Tribal Tab. Next slide, please. And we're really excited about the new direction and the partnership that we have with Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, as well as the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. And we're doing a lot of work across EPA regions and doing more in that space. And look forward to working more with ITEC as well. So lots happening and a lot of new creative opportunities, really more robust services and capabilities. And so look forward to working with you all even more. Next slide, please. Just generally, these are kind of the big kind of ticket items, the areas that we're working in with storytelling and community visioning. And Jason and the good work that Cherokee Nation is doing was such a good example of that, being able to tell your story and move those sites through that entire continuum. We're also working through the kind of conventional process with our assessments and cleanup and redevelopment, helping support those efforts. And then also with the TRP program, really whether you're establishing a program or really advancing that, we have the services, the professionals to help you do that. And then also thinking about financing and funding in Indian country. It can be challenging and it's very much unique and specialized. And so we have some new partners that are supporting that effort. And then within that other category, thinking about all those things that you may have in mind, maybe things that we're missing that we haven't been able to do historically, but new opportunities, connections, innovations. So look forward to hearing from you all in terms of being able to serve you more effectively. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a list, a litany of the things that we provide, different services, different capabilities. All of these can be customized and tailored to your particular needs. And so we'll talk a little bit more about some of those areas themselves, but again, just a variety of services, thinking about assessing what those needs are, what those questions, what your goals are with your tribal community, and we can help you advance those efforts. Next slide, please. And generally, they fall within kind of three focus areas, helping communities build that capacity that's so essential, the kind of continuity and cohesion for success long-term, given sometimes the turnover within the tribal community and with some of the professionals. And then we do a lot of training, outreach, education, opportunities like this to connect with you directly. And then also thinking about the site-specific needs that you have, the one-on-one, the visioning, the charrettes, and that type of activity to support you moving forward. Next slide, please. And here's just an example of some, we have a whole array of tools that we have on our website. They're free, they're available, and really can help you, whether it is with grant writing, with BIT, as Beth effectively noted earlier, or some of the other initiatives that we have. Please explore those and reach out to us. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of some of the things that we provide. And we are working to really transcend some of the EPA regional boundaries and work across those regions and help tribes connect with peers. And so there's a lot there, and we're continuing to grow and build those resources and look forward to seeing many of you in September. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of, we've been updating our training resources with the TRP modules, the elements. And so please stay tuned, reach out to us, and let us know how things are working and then what we might be able to do to really improve our services. Next slide, please. And these are just some examples of the one-on-one. Many of you may be familiar with what we were doing with our partners with the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes in Oklahoma. And this is another opportunity where we worked with ITEC and Cherokee Nation. They did some of the phase 1 and phase 2 work that was really crucial to position the Concho, those former BIA school sites to be ready for cleanup. And so just another example of really the kind of peer collaboration in Indian country that is so vital. Next slide, please. Here's an example of some of the work that we've been supporting in Alaska. Just again, the visioning, thinking about old facilities, lifeways that are changing and how best to support the community moving forward. Next slide, please. And just an example of some of we have a lot of partners that we work with in terms of Indigenous design and planning, charrettes, visioning, and really come up with some good products and opportunities to help bring the community together and really realize that vision. Next slide, please. And so easy to work with. Just reach out to us and we'll really try to understand what it is your local goals are and assemble the right team to support you moving forward and really, establish a path forward and achieve and be very successful together. Next slide, please. So yeah, just reach out. Myself, Jennifer Clancy is the co-leader, and let us know, and we look forward to working with you all. So I think we're getting close to the end of our program, and really just wanted to thank you all, our distinguished speakers, Roxanne, Jacqueline, Tori, Beth, Jason, the team behind the scenes, Kristen, Dana, Sherry, and those that were involved last week, Jennifer, Yesenia, Jen, as well as the Cherokee Nation team with Sheila and Karen. So really thanks to you all, the audience, for participating and supporting us, and we look forward to really doing more together. We also wanted to remind you about the individual one-on-one support. If you're thinking about coming in for a grant, please reach out. We can help review those, help you strategize, as Beth noted, as Kristen noted, and please take the time to complete the evaluation as well. This will help us with our reporting, our programming, and really just improve our services to you all. So once again, just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to be with us and to learn together. So at this point, I don't know if there are any other follow-up questions, but I think for the most part, this concludes our program today.
Thank you, Oral, and thank you, Jason
you.
and Roxanne. I appreciate it. And I believe this will be on KSU TAP's website as well, the recording and presentation.
You're
Yes.
correct. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.